morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by ServPro, and we are loaded. Kirby Smart challenges Georgia fans, getting ready for Friday. We're excited about that. New information here on Colby Young. What does it all mean? We'll try to decipher. Two great guests, Connor Riley, the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Jake's going to tell us today a really interesting story about one of the big moments in the early days of the Kirby Smart era that involved a win against Georgia Tech. We will cover all of that. And, oh, yeah, by the way, College Football Playoff Top 25 comes out tonight, and it could give us some clues here about what kind of path that Georgia could have to a possible national championship if it can just win that SEC championship next Saturday. But prior to that, there is business to take care of between the hedges, and you are invited to be a part of it. And, by the way, one of the most outspoken guys in college football has given you a pretty big compliment recently. You may not know that, but we'll tell you about that and why that is relevant ahead of Friday's game, too. As you can tell, we are jam-packed today, and we're glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro. Cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is a guy in college football who is very outspoken, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes he gets a little criticism. I would say as of late, he's getting a little bit of criticism. But the other day, he gave you a really big compliment, and you may have missed it, but it's important today for reasons we're about to explain, and we'll get to that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's start with the stakes for Friday. Georgia at home against Georgia Tech, a chance to kind of replicate what happened 2 weeks ago when Tennessee came in here. The fans obviously playing a huge role in Georgia's convincing win over the Vols, and frankly, a welcome change after what has felt like almost a full season's worth of playing games at Ole Miss and at Alabama and at Texas, all these really, really tough road venues. Georgia got a chance a couple of weeks ago to make it a really tough environment on the team it was playing, Tennessee, and boy, that really felt good. And now you get a chance to do that again this upcoming week. And I love the fact, and I've said this so many times, Kirby Smart is all about business, and Kirby Smart's all about the task at hand. Kirby Smart doesn't get wrapped up in peripheral issues too much. But, boy, one of the things that he's always really generous about doing, I believe, is inviting all of us to sort of be a part of this thing. That it's not just the team and the coaches and the players who are out there competing. It's everyone who gets a chance to sort of aid in Georgia's victory. That Kirby really does believe that the atmosphere helps produce the outcome. And on Friday night, bundle up. It's going to be cold. Wear black if you want. Don't really quite know what Georgia's thinking on that. We've got the little troll from the equipment account, the official account, but they do that kind of stuff all the time, and it's usually pretty funny when they do. But whether you wear the red, whether you wear the black, just be ready to show up and be loud. And it's not just me who's challenging to do that. It was Kirby Smart himself who issued that direct challenge to Georgia fans yesterday to say, we need you here, and we need you a part of this Black Friday night for a reason, an invitation for everybody to be as loud as they possibly can. This is how Kirby Smart said that yesterday.
This is a huge matchup. This is an interstate rivalry game that's been part of history for a long, long time. And it is a physical game. It was a very physical game last year. It'll be a physical game this year. I'm excited to be at home on a Friday night and looking forward to our crowd impacting this game. And we need them to impact this game because we do have it at home.
I mean, I love that from Kirby Smart, that the fans have a chance to impact the game, not watch the game, not be a spectator. I mean, understand this here for a moment. It's like if I go to the movie theater and watch a movie, I can't change the ending of that movie. I can sit there and observe it, but I don't get a chance to participate in it. Same thing for like a concert for the most part, right? It's like I can go see my favorite musicians, but ultimately they're going to play what they're going to play, and it's going to be what it is. And, it's like they come out for the encore and they sort of act like, oh, we're deciding we're going to do an encore here. But the truth is that's all part of the show. They have the encore pre-planned. That's all part of the thing. It's sort of designed to make you feel like you're a part of it. But they do the same thing in every town, every single show, every single stop, all along the way, the entire tour. that it's all just sort of predestined and preordained. But as Kirby Smart points out, football's not that way. College football in particular is not that way. That when you go on the road in college football, you're not just facing the 11 guys in the field, and it's not just the coaches battling wits against each other. You are also forced to endure the energy of like 93,000 people who want you to fail if you're the road team. They want you to fail, and they're going to do everything they can to make your job miserable. And we've seen time and time again, in this year in particular, that these home crowds are just impacting the game. These home crowds are just changing the tone of the game. And Kirby Smart's pointed out throughout the years how much that's worked out for Georgia, and that has a chance to be true in this game again on Friday night. And there's another reason why this really matters, is because when you look at everything else that's about to happen for UGA, whether the season lasts for 4 more games or however many games it lasts, however more games it could last, I guess. This is all still really new to many of us. But the point is, no matter how much longer this season lasts, every other game for the rest of the way, we would say, probably has its own level of motivation, its own obvious goal. Of course, you want to be the SEC champion, for instance, next Saturday. And, of course, it's not just the trophy for the conference, but it's also the easier path in the playoffs. There's an obvious motivation to why you'd want to win the SEC. And then if you're able to get into the college football playoff, of course, it's survive and advance, win, and moving on with the chance to win the national championship. That every game sort of has its own juice built into it the rest of the way. But on Friday night's another one of those issues where you sort of have to find your own juice in the rivalry game. I think there is as we talked to John Stinchcomb about yesterday, sort of a tangible advantage to Georgia for winning the game. But there's also the bragging rights of beating your rival. But if we're just being completely honest here for a moment, some of that's a little bit abstract. Some of that is a little bit difficult to define. So if you can get the lift from the fans, if you can get that boost from the fans, all of a sudden, all the stuff about playing this game in this spot ahead of all what could come for Georgia, all of a sudden, all of that gets just a little bit easier. And I believe that's why Kirby Smart is inviting you once again to be a part of this the way that he has done in the past. In fact, yesterday it kind of came up of, okay, well, now you know you're in the SEC championship and you know all of this, and obviously it's the kind of thing that has to be acknowledged, and Smart's no fool. Of course, he's aware of all of this, but at the same time, trying to, as Georgia's done many times in the past against Georgia Tech, acknowledge what is about to come without diminishing what is taking place here right now. Kirby Smart on that one more time.
My thoughts are on Georgia Tech. I mean, it's a great honor to be able to play in the SEC championship game. It is probably one of the greatest events in all sports, because the games that you play in are great matchups. But at this point in time, we don't even know who that is, nor do I care. My concern 100% is with Georgia Tech because of what that game means to so many in this state, so many on our team, and what it means to this season and this seniors playing at home. So that's the focus.
There are so many Georgia fans that listen in on that. They hear that, and, man, they want that to be true. They want to make sure that Georgia doesn't get caught looking ahead because the pain of a rivalry loss with, that cousin that you have that's a Tech fan or whatever else. They want Kirby Smart's words to be true, that no one's thinking about the SEC championship yet. No one's focused about a possible return to the college football playoff yet. Everybody is laser focused, sharply looking in on what's going to happen against Georgia Tech. That's where everybody's attention is right now. Well, if you want to make sure that's true, or if you want to increase the likelihood that that's true, then if you're one of the fans lucky enough to be able to be there on Friday night, to have tickets for that game, to be a part of that, the atmosphere you create with the noise that you make, that energy becomes contagious. And it becomes impossible if you're a Georgia player to be thinking ahead to, well, is it going to be Texas or is it going to be Texas A&M? It becomes impossible as a coach to be thinking about anything else other than, hey, we want to feed off of the feeling that exists in this building here right now. We want that chance. We want to be a part of that. That if you do everything you can do and everything you have done before, this idea of looking past a Tech or looking forward to anything else, It simply becomes impossible. And the cool thing about this is, as I said before, SEC championship, that's got its own motivation. College football playoff, that's got its own motivation. But this is the last chance for fans to kind of create the motivational moment for the game, to sort of create the catalyst that propels Georgia to the win, because after this, only a portion of fans will get to travel, and some of these tickets are going to be really expensive. Some of the distances could be a long way away. All kinds of stuff is on the table for the future. But this is sort of the last chance for everybody this year, we think anyway, to get together between the hedges and have this moment happen in this way. And I mentioned off the top of the program, recently, one of the most outspoken guys in college football gave many of you a really significant compliment. You may have missed it. Now, listen, lately, Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss coach, is in a little bit of trouble because, at least with some people, because he talked about how nobody wants to play in the SEC championship and, kind of stirred the pot with that. And then he went out and lost the very next game. And anytime you sort of make some big talk and they don't back it up on the field, people are going to kind of be a little, they're going to kind of be at you a little bit. And so Lane Kiffin's dealing with some of that right now. But that doesn't mean that everything that Lane Kiffin says is wrong. And the other day, as I said before, Lane Kiffin, without, on even kind of just sort of a different topic, something unrelated to Georgia, gave Georgia and gave you in particular a really good compliment. And I think on Friday night, it'd be really cool for Georgia fans to prove just how right Lane Kiffin is. Let me set this up for you, and I'm going to show you the quote from Lane. So there'd been some talk lately about, I don't know that this is who Lane Kiffin was talking about, but there was this thing where the Pitt coach, Pat Narduzzi, do you know who that is, had said the other day that he thought the ACC was the deepest league in college football, which is just, the most laughable thing you've ever heard. Try not to drive off the road laughing if you're hearing this while you're in your car. But that's what Pat Narduzzi said the other day. Now, I don't know if it's Lane Kiffin reaching out to Narduzzi here. I'm not even sure those two guys even know each other. But, after that had kind of come up, when Lane Kiffin was on the weekly SEC coaches teleconference, he said something about the idea of any of these other leagues thinking they're as tough as the SEC, kind of going along with what Kirby Smart has said many times too. Let me show you this quote on the screen here for a moment. I got this from Saturday on South, but it's been obviously quoted a million times, including at DawgNation. This is what Kiffin said about the idea of where the SEC stacks up in comparison to other leagues. He says, well, I said it earlier. When people want to talk about other conferences or the playoffs or coaches and make a statement about their conferences, the idea of conference bias, he says it's very different going on the road in this conference. Joking, I sent a text and said to one of these other coaches, he made a statement about their conference being the best in college football, and I said, hey, this is where you come in. This is what Lane Kiffin told another coach outside of the SEC. Kiffin said, try going to 100 Sanford Drive. That's the address, obviously, where the Georgia Bulldogs play. He says, try going to 100 Sanford Drive and see if you still say that. He says, it's different. And by it, he means the SEC. So when Lane Kiffin had a chance to sort of, kind of rib another coach or take a jab at another coach, the one thing he pointed to that makes the SEC different is the difficulty of playing at 100 Sanford Drive. That's what Lane Kiffin thinks about all of you, not just the team that plays there, that obviously hasn't lost there since 2019, but all of you that helped create this. Kirby Smart has said, Arkansas game in 2021, you gave us 10 points. Tennessee game in 2022, Tennessee game in 2024, other examples of that where fans have clearly been a part of that. Lane Kiffin says, hey, it's a venue like Sanford Stadium. It's a location like, as he says, the street address, 100 Sanford Drive. It's a location like that that just makes Georgia different. So there you go. Kirby Smart extends the invitation to you in a roundabout way. Prove this week against Georgia Tech just how right Lane Kiffin really is. That anybody in, like, say, the ACC who says, oh, man, our league is just deeper. Week to week, our competition, as silly as that sounds, apparently somebody believes that. You get a chance to show them how wrong they are. You give a chance to give aid to a Georgia team, if we're being honest, it's been through the grind. It's a little bit banged up. It's had some injuries. It's played a schedule unlike anything else and that anybody in college football has been asked to play. And it could have many more games on the way, along the way to a possible national championship. But maybe, but just maybe This is the last time they'll get a chance to do it in front of this home crowd. This is your last chance until next fall, maybe, to be the kind of impactful force that Kirby Smart has said you were before. This is a team that wants to feed off of you. This is a team that maybe even kind of needs to. Kirby Smart says, we need you on Friday night. Georgia fans, they've answered the call before. My guess is they'll be ready to do that again. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. We're glad you're with us. By the way, big announcement for us coming up about 5 minutes from right now. Can't wait to tell you all about that as it relates to big things going on in the weeks to come. But first, whether you're joining us video or podcast or radio, we're just really happy that you're a part of our program today. We'll give you a quick podcast update, too, before I thank our friends from ServPro. So one of the things we've noticed is that obviously we do the show every day. We post the show every day. It has had a weird publish time on both Apple and Spotify as of late. It was a little bit better yesterday. I kind of got in there and sort of tinkered with some of the back-end stuff a little bit, and it was a little bit better. But it's still kind of showing up where it's like yesterday it said it had published the day before, which is obviously impossible because we can't do that. So I think we're going to continue to work on that a little bit more. So hopefully you're in the process of seeing your podcast feed kind of get back to normal. I hope that's the case. I know there's been a couple of complaints about folks watching the show on Facebook too. Just really, listen, there's always going to be, we have so many platforms. There's always something going on. So we're trying to be responsive to all of that and always want your information about how the experience is for you, because we obviously want to be as user-friendly as we can possibly be. Speaking of that, our friends at ServPro feel the same way when it comes to folks who trust them for big cleanup projects. And, you see water damage, fire damage. I was driving by some old house of the day, and it just got decimated by it. Looked like water had, I don't know, some pipe had burst or something like that. I mean, it just created this huge, huge mess, this old house that I was driving by, and I thought, boy, they need to call ServPro, because that's exactly what ServPro does. The restoration specialist is ServPro. Get it all put back together for you like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. Every franchise, independently owned and operated. That means when you do business with ServPro, you're doing business with a company that's got as much of a vested interest in a satisfactory outcome for you as you do for yourself, because that's how their livelihood is built around taking care of folks like you, restoration specialists, getting those cleanup jobs put back together. So if you've got a mess at your home or your commercial property or whatever you got going on, our friends from ServPro want to help you out. Restoration specialists want to get it cleaned back up, put back together like it never even happened. So find them online, servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com. One more time, that's S-E-R-V, servpro.com. So we got Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. That's going to be good. College Football Playoff Top 25 comes out later on tonight. We'll have some thoughts about that here coming up in a little bit as well. Connor Riley with us in a couple of minutes here, too. Big announcement a couple of minutes from right now, so just jam-packed with everything. However, as we kind of lead into all of that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today. And I would say the biggest thing on the minds of Georgia fans ahead of this week is a story that's also been lingering the news now for a couple of weeks that we did get an update on yesterday, and that involves the suspended wide receiver Colby Young, who has been dealing with some criminal charges around a domestic incident. As you know, the accuser has recanted her story and signed an affidavit about that. And so I think there has been, some thought here that if those charges could be dropped, there could be a pathway for Colby Young returning to the Georgia football team, maybe in some form or fashion before this season comes to an end. So let's walk through the timeline on this a little bit. I want to get to some new information on this and perhaps a little bit of a thought about what might be set to happen next. So let me start with this. It was the week of the Tennessee game that we found out that the accuser against Young was now saying something different than she'd said the first time. And obviously that at least seemed like opened up the door for the possibility those charges against Young could be dropped at the wish of his accuser. This is what Kirby Smart said about that at the time. We didn't have much time to talk about this then because Georgia was getting ready for such a big game. But this was the news as Smart relayed it going back a couple of weeks ago. Here's Kirby.
The legal process has got to play itself out. Look, we want to support Colby where we can. We continue to provide him with access to our facilities and the support resources we have, whether that's ranking, the training room, mental health, the weight room. But the legal process has to play itself out before we can do anything.
The Rankin there is the Rankin Smith Academic Center. That's what Smart's talking about. So what we said was, okay, well, if the original statement from Kim Stevens, Young's attorney going back a while ago, was that Young wanted to play, and if Georgia was kind of allowing some of those things like academic centers and weight rooms and things like that to be accessible by Colby Young, then it seemed like that Georgia was also leaving the door open too. So I think the interpretation of that at the time was, okay, well, if this can be kind of cleared up from a legal standpoint, if Young really does exercise his right to kind of fight to prove his innocence in the criminal justice system, and that works out to his favor, then maybe the pathway would exist here for him to return. But obviously a lot of this is sort of predicated on the charges against Young being dropped. We still don't know what's going to happen on that, but there were reports. In fact, let me show you this on the screen here. DawgNation writing about this yesterday. I guess it was Mark Wise from the Athens Banner-Herald who had this first. The headline at DawgNation, new developments see suspended wide receiver Colby Young increase involvement with the team. You can read that story at DawgNation.com. On the screen also in front of us in the background is a photo that Warren Brinson shared on his social media of Young and Brinson together, apparently, at the football facility yesterday. So Young apparently back and going through some things here, more involved than he was before. Young's attorney, Kim Stevens, saying this, that the Title IX office at Georgia has cleared Colby, so he was allowed to return to team activities, including practice. Kim Stevens, Colby Young's attorney, goes on to say, we expect and hope that the prosecutors will follow the Title IX office's lead and dismiss the charges against Mr. Young in the very near future. So that is what Kim Stevens, Young's attorney, is saying, which obviously for those of us who don't kind of live in the crime beat world of, criminal justice and things like that, I think the question that just gets obviously asked here is, well, if all of this seems to be going in that direction, Young is back at Georgia practice, the Title IX, which, is a little bit different than the legal process, if they've now cleared Young, if all of that sort of moving the right direction, then how come the charges have not been dropped yet? And what are we waiting on? And is the fact that we're still waiting on that to happen, assuming it's going to, based on the recent movings, is there something else possibly going on here? Now, I don't have to tell you this. You already know. Clearly, I don't know. This is not my area of expertise necessarily. I guess the one thing that I would say is, and I just think some of this kind of comes down to this is just how stuff like this works, which is any issue like this is going to come with a lot of scrutiny. Georgia fans scrutinize a situation like this when charges first come down, but other people, different kinds of constituencies, sometimes scrutinize things like this if charges go away. Anytime you're involved in law enforcement with sort of a high-profile situation like this, there's just going to be a lot of scrutiny. And that scrutiny has a tendency to make people be really, really careful and move at some points very, very slowly. And so it would not surprise me, and once again, I don't know. I'm not an expert on any of this kind of stuff. But if the charges are going to be dropped, it would not surprise me if something like this were to happen somewhere around Wednesday night, Thursday during Thanksgiving, early Black Friday morning. And I'm not trying to be cynical. I'm not trying to be whatever. It's just sometimes this is how this kind of stuff goes. That in situations where really nobody wants to invite any extra scrutiny on anything, that sometimes announcements like this have a tendency to be made somewhere around a holiday, somewhere around a time in which some people are sort of focused in on other kinds of things, paying attention to other kind of stuff. And the honest truth is, if Young has been wrongly accused, and obviously I don't have the facts to know that one way or another, but if he's been wrongly accused, then the right thing for him to do is get his life back. The right thing for him to do is be able to have his name cleared, have his football career restored. If he's been wrongly accused, that is the appropriate next step that should happen here. And frankly, I don't know that I just don't live in that kind of world in terms of evaluating, stories like this very much. So I probably won't ever weigh in on that particular thing too much. But in a simple if-then situation, if this was an incorrect accusation, then getting his life back seems like the appropriate next step. And if that's how all of this is going to play out, there still could be a desire to do this without as little, attention as possible. So if news on this is coming, don't be surprised if it comes the time when you almost expect news to happen, I guess, the least, right there around Thanksgiving, something like that. And just see in the next couple of days here, if we don't see something around that kind of clear up, we'll obviously be watching for that. We'll make that around the doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Now, listen, I'll tell you this. I don't enjoy these kinds of conversations. I don't really feel very well equipped around them sometimes. All I can do is sort of, read the situation the best way I possibly can. But there are other things that I enjoy far more than that. And so before we bring on Connor Riley here today, let me tell you what one of those things is here right now. I teased this a little bit yesterday, and so I want to jump in and give you the official details here today. We are so excited to let you know, now that it's official and true, that Georgia's going to be in the SEC Championship next Saturday. DawgNation, as you already know, is going to be there too, and you are invited to be a part of it there too, with another DawgNation Invasion tailgate prior to the game as Georgia gets ready to go on that road to Atlanta. That begins with the SEC Championship, and if Georgia handles its business, could also conclude in Atlanta as well before the national championship. What a run that Georgia has a chance to go on here, and what an awesome opportunity to play a couple of these big games right down the road from all of us at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So get ready to celebrate. Get ready to be a part of that. So many of you have been a part of these DawgNation Invasion events before. This is going to be an awesome one before a big SEC championship as Georgia tries to maintain its dominance here in this conference and in this sport. So be a part of that. Get more details. DawgNation.com/tailgate for more. DawgNation.com/tailgate. Can't wait to see you for our next DawgNation Invasion event in Atlanta. Of course, ATL Sports Strip's powering this too. We will see you there for that next Saturday. So be there. Be a part of that. Can't wait to have you there. Awesome stuff. Now, here's what else is awesome. Jake Fromm later on, but for now, everything going on, including the read on the situation as it relates to Colby Young. Let's cover all of that with Connor Riley here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Well, let me say hello to Connor Riley here today. And Connor, we were just talking about the Colby Young situation. I don't love talking about stuff like this because it's just not very fun. Obviously, if Young has been wrongly accused, he deserves to get his life back, and maybe that's what's in the process of happening here. I don't know that I'll ever dive deep enough into the details of this to necessarily know all that went on here. Don't know, so that it's just not my world. That's not the world that I live in necessarily. But the one prediction I did make a moment ago, that because, scrutiny is not always welcome when it comes to stuff like this, that if there's an announcement coming, would not surprise me if it comes Wednesday night, Friday morning, somewhere around and I'm not trying to be overly cynical, but this is just how stuff like this operates, that, people just don't like a whole lot of extra scrutiny. Even if you're doing the right thing, people still don't want to have that big of a spotlight on them. So if there's news coming on Colby Young, nestled very close to Thanksgiving, either on the front end or the back end of that, I would not be surprised if that plays out. What do you think is likely to happen here?
Yeah, so I think it's important to sort of walk through the updates that we have gotten. Yesterday, effectively, the Title IX investigation into Colby Young was dropped, or Colby Young was cleared in that manner. And so I think that's why you see him being more involved around the team in that regard. He is still suspended. He still cannot play. And the next thing that has to happen in order for Colby to return would be that he would need those legal charges dropped. His arraignment is tentatively set for December 10th, but the prosecutor can choose to drop these charges at any time before. And so that is sort of what you're next looking for in terms of Colby Young possibly returning to play. Those charges could be dropped, as you point out, BA, Wednesday or Friday, roughly around, whenever it is least convenient to the people that have to cover and write this story, as yesterday's announcement somewhat was. And so there's a chance that he could be eligible to play against Georgia Tech this week. There's a chance he could be eligible to play in the SEC championship game should those charges ultimately get dropped. There's also a case that he still gets arraigned on December 10th, and the case sort of continues from there. So it is right now very much in wait and see mode, but it does seem to be a positive development in the sense of getting potentially Colby Young back for this football team.
Yeah, I mean, listen, like I said before, I hate getting into stuff like this, but I think it's fair to point out that when it comes to a criminal court, that's a burden of proof that's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Less than that would be like, say, a civil trial where it's a preponderance of evidence, 51% more likely guilty than not. A Title IX tribunal is even less of a burden of proof than that. So I would say, just based on my sort of rudimentary understanding of this, that if he's been cleared by a Title IX situation with a far lower burden of proof than a criminal court has, I mean, once again, my very, very rudimentary, very, very knee-jerk, uneducated view of this would say that he's got to be pretty likely to have these criminal charges dropped because the Title IX burden of proof is just so much lower than a criminal charge is.
Right, and we factor in the fact that previously his accuser has asked for these charges to be dismissed against him. She has, per Young's lawyer, reached out to the solicitor's office to have these charges dropped. And so to answer the question that is on the lower third presented in front of me, will Colby Young return for Georgia? Yes, I do believe that is the case. The big question is ultimately when that happens. It could happen before this Georgia Tech game. It could happen before the SEC championship game. It could happen after the SEC championship game. So right now, we're very much just in wait and see mode, even though if you were looking for Colby Young to return to this Georgia team and play, I think, a crucial role at that X receiver spot, these developments continue to trend in the right direction.
So let's move on what I think is a happier topic, the game on Friday night. And I think the conventional wisdom here is that Georgia's a better team than Georgia Tech, but Georgia Tech is good at the sort of thing that sometimes gives Georgia trouble, including against UMass this past Saturday, and gave Georgia trouble last year when these two teams got together in the regular season finale. Tech has, at least if Haynes King is fully healthy, it has the running quarterback. It has sort of a sharp offensive coordinator in Buster Faulkner, and that's the pathway for a potential victory for Georgia Tech. And no matter how big of a favorite Georgia is, that if Georgia's not careful, they could lose this game because this is the sort of crazy season where almost anything seems possible. So why couldn't that result take place, especially given the fact we've seen Georgia not exactly at its best a few times here this year? How much do you kind of buy into that narrative that sort of seems to be the conventional wisdom, or are we more likely to see the other stuff prevail, that Georgia's just the bigger team with the better players, with the obvious edge, and that, whatever happened a year ago or whatever people sort of are fearful that might happen right now, that it doesn't actually fully materialize? What is your perception of this game here a few days out from seeing it?
So, one, just as someone who is a fan of the Georgia Tech rivalry and wants to see this game and wants to see this game matter, Brent Key has done a phenomenal job in terms of doing that. I wrote about that this morning on DawgNation.com. Brent Key has done a really good job of, I think, making Georgia Tech into a respectable program, whether it be his additions to the transfer portal or even going out and adding Buster Faulkner to be this team's offensive coordinator. But in the way Brent Key has talked about this Georgia game, there's a lot of revisionist history here in terms of the way that game played out a season ago and making that game seem closer than it was. Key has said, if we get one third down stop, we get a chance to go potentially try and tie the game. One, they were down by 8, so it's not like they were going to win the game in regulation, even if they did mount another touchdown drive there. 2, last year against Georgia Tech, Georgia did not play Ladd McConkey in that game. They did not play Brock Bowers in that game. They did not play Tate Ratledge in that game. They were holding players out because they had an SEC championship the following week against Alabama. 3, it was 31-16. Georgia is driving in to score, and Dylan Bell fumbles at the 1-yard line. If he scores a touchdown there, it's 38-16, and I think we view that game a lot differently than maybe it has been discussed here at this point in time. So I think it's very interesting that as you lay out the case there, there's a recipe there for this to be a close game, and Vegas still sees Georgia as a 20.5-point favorite. And similarly against Tennessee, going into that game, it was a lot of, Georgia's kind of a little bit wounded, a little bit wobbly. Tennessee should be able to give them some trouble. They have a very stout defense. And yet Vegas still saw Georgia as a 9.5-point favorite, and Georgia still found a way to cover in that game. And I know Georgia hasn't been a great team at covering this year, but I also, when I watched that Georgia Tech NC State game, the Haynes King that I saw did not look all that healthy, and maybe they were limiting his role because they want to have him as close to healthy for this game against Georgia. And I know that Aaron Philo has done some impressive things for them. But if Georgia Tech gets the same level of Haynes King that they got against NC State, I really have serious questions about what this team is going to be able to do, especially yes, Georgia Tech was able to win that game. They got a defensive touchdown in that game from EJ Lightsey, and another one of their touchdowns was effectively a 3-yard touchdown run off of a turnover there. So, this Georgia Tech team, it's a major credit to them for getting where they want to be, but I also wouldn't be totally surprised if Georgia does find a way to lay down the hammer in this game.
Well, that'd be certainly a fun result and a great way to conclude what I expect to be the regular season slate at Sanford Stadium, or definitely the regular season slate, but probably the home finale for the year. That would be a really cool thing to see. And speaking of that, the time we have left, I want to talk about these playoff rankings here for a moment, because I think a huge recalibration took place for Georgia fans on Saturday when Alabama lost. And you come to the conclusion that, gosh, Georgia's going to the SEC championship. I don't mind saying this. I was right there with a lot of people of, boy, I'm not quite so sure you want to be in the SEC championship this year. Getting a home playoff game may be enough of a path to advance the playoff without getting the bye. And I was kind of excited about sort of having Georgia Tech be kind of the big game for Georgia, of put all your energy in winning that game, and then you get a chance to go play on the 21st, whatever the date is. I was kind of excited about how this was setting up. And then the SEC championship sort of falls into your lap here a little bit. But if the rankings work out at the end in what I would say is sort of a conventional way, I do think this could be really to Georgia's advantage. If they can win the SEC, there is at least a chance they could then win the national championship without having to play either Ohio State or Oregon, and one of those two teams not until the championship. That if you're in a sort of a half of the bracket where you're feasting on the Penn States and the Miamis, you may not win it, because in a year like this, Georgia could lose to just about anybody. They could lose Friday night if they're not careful. But if that's what your bracket is, boy, I would say there is a lot out there for Georgia if it can get into that type of situation, dependent on winning the SEC. What do you expect tonight's rankings to sort of foreshadow for us about that?
Yeah, so I think if these rankings hold as we all expect them to, Georgia's ceiling is kind of capped at getting that 8 seed, because I don't think Penn State's going to lose to Maryland this weekend. Notre Dame could lose to USC, but I'd be pretty surprised by that. I know Kaylee doesn't much care for Notre Dame, but I think that this is a team that has played really well outside of their obvious loss to Northern Illinois this season. And so they're kind of just going to be stuck in that 8 spot, unless they win the SEC, at which point I believe they will jump up to get the number 2 overall seed. And as you laid out there, BA, again, you're not going to have Oregon or Ohio State on that side of the bracket. If Alabama's maybe potentially going to sneak in as, say, the number 12 seed, because I don't know if they're going to be able to get over a Boise State with this third loss, a 12-5 matchup of the Big Ten championship loser versus Alabama clears up a lot of problems for Georgia. Because let's be honest, I think that a lot of the reason that Georgia fans really didn't want to play in the SEC championship game is because of the fact that they were going to see Alabama again, and it's an Alabama team that has just given Georgia trouble fits over the years, especially in that building in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So with them completely cleared out of the picture for the SEC championship game, where now you either get to play a Texas team that you seem to match up very well with, or an A&M team that, quite frankly, I don't know how good they are, but the fact that they get this Texas team at home this week might be enough to get them into the SEC championship game. I think it leaves you feeling a lot better about the way that Georgia can go into the SEC championship game, and the incentive of winning that game and getting the 2 seed and then playing probably Penn State, Indiana winner in the quarterfinal, and then maybe, some combination of Notre Dame, Miami, SMU, Boise, whoever, in that 3-6-11 semifinal. I think you absolutely take that. One thing I would note, though, it is important to point this out as we sort of game things out here and look at the past and whatnot. One of the semifinals will be played in Miami this year. And so if Miami is able to find a way to get to the semifinals, and they happen to be in the one that is played in Miami, that is at least a little bit interesting to follow and monitor there. So it might not be quite as rosy, but I still think you take playing Miami in Hard Rock Stadium over having to play in Ohio State or having to play in Oregon, or potentially even having to play Ohio State and Oregon, depending on the way the bracket would have shaken out if Georgia were locked into that 8 seed.
I think that's probably true. I think you're right about that. Last thing real quick, we had to do a thing where we had to kind of project our playoff teams, and I still had Alabama in the field. That's not what I want to be true. I mean, it sort of feels like the same kind of gift that program has been given a couple of times in the past, but if it plays out the way that it seems like it might right now, as like a 12 seed or something like that, even with 3 losses, I sort of see Alabama getting in over South Carolina because it beat it earlier in the year. And I just don't take an SMU or a team like that seriously. Even after losing on Saturday, I still sort of think Alabama makes the playoff.
It's the famous Austin Powers clip. Why won't you die? Look, Alabama got their butts kicked on Saturday against Oklahoma, and it was very early on evident that Oklahoma was just there to kick butt, and that's what they absolutely did. And look, an Auburn team coming off a great win over Texas A&M at home. Auburn hasn't been very competitive in Tuscaloosa in a long time, and so it'll be interesting to see how that game plays out. But I do agree with you. Until I don't see Alabama on the graphic, I'm just going to find it hard to believe that this committee is going to want to keep them out. Look, we've talked all along about we don't know how this committee is going to react to teams losing in their conference championship games. And I think the path that if you're a Georgia fan that doesn't want to see Alabama, the path that you might be rooting for is actually for SMU to upset Miami in the ACC championship game, provided both those teams win this weekend. And that way, the decision isn't between, say, an Alabama and an SMU, but rather an Alabama and a big brand like a Miami. I think that might help tremendously in that regard. The other thing that I think you obviously need to root for this weekend, you need to root for Clemson to beat South Carolina, because a 10-2 Clemson team with a win over a good South Carolina team, that is a potential head-to-head meeting point there. Well, I don't know that's going to be enough to keep Clemson ahead of Alabama just because of the way that they lost to Louisville and the way that they lost to Georgia. I do think that it's going to help Alabama. It's going to help keep Alabama out of it because of a quality team like a Clemson picking up a win like that over a South Carolina team that has been very impressive of late, but still got blown out by Ole Miss, which is also a 3-loss team, lost at Alabama, and then found a way to lose to an LSU team that isn't all it was cracked up to be.
Connor, great stuff. I look forward to being with you on video tonight. We'll react to those college football playoff rankings as they come out a little bit later tonight than normal, but nonetheless, looking forward to doing that. Always a spirited conversation. And, of course, see you Friday there in Athens and back here again for DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro very soon again as well.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I'll give you more on tonight's rankings here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let's get you ready for the DawgNation Cruise coming up in April of 2025. I talked about our DawgNation Invasion earlier, and it's always funny. Anytime we do a DawgNation Invasion, I always end up seeing a bunch of folks who are part of our DawgNation Cruise, sort of a special part of our DawgNation family here, and so many folks enjoying all the great things that Royal Caribbean has going on, including all these specialty restaurants on the brand new ships, including Utopia of the Seas. One of my favorite things about Utopia of the Seas is they took a restaurant space that had kind of previously been used for something else, and they made Giovanni's Table one of the great Italian restaurants on board, delicious food. They've made it even bigger, like 2 stories, kind of overlooking the Central Park neighborhood, and just made it an unbelievable experience. And obviously great food is one of the biggest parts of a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. All those really delicious restaurants gives you a chance to enjoy that. So let Jessica Slater help plan a DawgNation cruise for you. Coming up in April, you can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll get you ready for all of that. We're going to be quick with our cruise around the SEC today because I want to get to Jake Fromm here coming up. So let me just give you a couple of things very fast here for a moment. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Notre Dame is treated, because Notre Dame is one of those teams that, coming off a win against Army, blowout fashion, but still with the worst loss of anybody who's in playoff contention. Do we see movement from the rankings in them that would lead you to believe that they are totally forgiven for having lost to Northern Illinois? And if we do, that could mean that the loser of that Big Ten title game would fall below Notre Dame in the final rankings, and maybe Notre Dame goes up to the 5 seed, which would possibly mean that Georgia, to win the national championship, would need to beat both Oregon and Ohio State. Obviously, those are two teams that Georgia certainly could be, but those are also the two teams that we would put in the small category of teams that we believe could give Georgia its toughest game. They've been the two highest-rated teams all year long, so that becomes interesting. The other thing is, as I said before, if you're going to start trying to sift through all these SEC teams, we've got a lot of teams with very, very similar rankings here right now, and somebody's still going to make the playoff. Tennessee would seem to be a huge beneficiary of what happened last week. Georgia can be the huge beneficiary of that. But I believe we'll find out tonight that in some form or fashion, Alabama's just not quite dead yet. And I get it. It's crony capitalism. It's corporate welfare. The same team gifted a spot in the BCS title game in 2011, also gifted with a spot in the College Football Playoff in 2017, both years which they did not even play, or I should say didn't win the SEC. Didn't even play for it in either of those years either. The fact they would be the first team to ever make the playoff with 3 losses, it just sort of something about that just sort of seems just appropriate given the fact that Alabama always seems to be given the benefit of the doubt other programs don't get, but that may be where all of this is heading. We'll be watching it closely and ready to give you those playoff rankings coming up tonight. And if you want to, we'll go ahead and bring our music down and get ready to call that Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So a lot going on with playoff rankings, the SEC championship falling into Georgia's lap, so much to cover on all of that right now. And so with that in mind, we'll get ready to do a Kroer Fresh Take and welcome in the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, onto the program here today. Jake, first of all, happy Thanksgiving to you. I know as a member of the Detroit Lions organization, Thanksgiving a little bit different kind of week for you than it is for the rest of us. You know, what's it like, I guess, being a part of an organization there that has been sort of a Thanksgiving tradition for my entire life? I'm imagining a lot different sort of week, right?
Yeah, man, this is a really cool and neat week for us. Get to play on Thursday, play on Thanksgiving. The whole world's going to be watching. It's buzzing around the building, man. We're excited and just trying to put together this game plan, put the tweaks on it, and get it jotted down to memory and go out and play a good game.
What are the ladies in your life, your wife and your mom, think about the fact they have to wait for the game to be concluded, I'm assuming, to have some sort of Thanksgiving with you? Listen, obviously they support your career, but I'm sure they probably feel like their time's encroached upon a little bit, just given the fact that it can't be quite the traditional Thanksgiving.
Yeah, of all the things to miss for, I think this one is okay. I think, get a pass because of my job and because of football. So I don't know how long I'll be able to get this pass, but for now and this year, we're good. And we'll be able to figure things out moving forward. So always excited to see family, a lot to be thankful for. It's going to be fun. Yeah,
if you're missing a meal because you're sneaking off to go hunting, I'm guessing they're probably not quite as happy about that, right?
That's right. You can get it done in the morning, but you have to make sure you're back by lunchtime.
So what was your reaction when, like the rest of us, you may be watching some of these games unfold on Saturday, and lo and behold, Georgia's going to the SEC championship almost kind of out of nowhere after the Alabama loss at Oklahoma? A lot of recalibration taking place here this week. What did you make of how that unfolded?
Yeah, absolute chaos what happened last weekend in college football. I mean, me and Drew were talking about it on our Punt Pass podcast last night. I think Georgia fans as a whole had already accepted, hey, we're probably not going to the SEC championship, and they were looking very optimistic about that. There's a lot of good that, could have come from that. Probably a safe spot in the college football playoff, getting guys healthy, getting some more rest. And so, I mean, to see them now in the SEC championship, I mean, it's just opened up a whole other can of worms. So this is a big deal. They have to go in and win this football game. The committee may have said that, hey, we're not going to punish teams for playing in a conference championship. I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. And from here on out, man, they have to win every single game that they're in.
So when you were Georgia quarterback, obviously you played Tech, and all 3 of your years as Georgia starter, knowing you were going to the SEC championship, and yet you also won all those games against Tech. What did y'all do to make sure, to, I guess, borrow an old phrase from Kirby Smart, that you kept the main thing, and you didn't look ahead to an SEC championship with Tech there looming? How did y'all manage to because, pretty convincing wins in all of those years, how did y'all manage to make sure that you had the right focus the week of that rivalry game?
Yeah, man, had a great leader in Coach Smart, had great leaders throughout the team. Like you said, keeping the main thing, but we didn't want to tarnish our season up to this point, and we wanted to make sure that we could go and finish things the right way. So taking care of business, an in-state rival, somebody that we did not want to lose to by any means. So it was really kind of go out and take care of business.
And then you were also involved in that 2017 game where, that was, of course, you weren't a part of the team that lost to Tech, but, pretty big deal being made that year of like the revenge tour and things like that. In fact, even after, the game against Tech in 2017, Kirby kind of for the first time acknowledged that y'all say it's a revenge tour. Well, this was our final box checked on that. And it's one of those things that years later, I guess this stuff can sort of be talked about more. But how much did you guys get fueled by the revenge attitude in that game against Tech? And how much behind the scenes was there, I guess, an attempt to sort of get you fired up and get everybody motivated after there had been obviously a loss to Tech the previous year?
Well, we had Nick Chubb and Sony Michel on our team, and part of a big reason of why they came back for their senior season was because of that loss to Georgia Tech. So, man, to being able to feed off their energy throughout the entire week, and the rest of us wanting to basically make it up to them and not wanting to put any tarnish to cap off their career at UGA. So, man, we wanted to go out and make the most of it for those guys. And, man, it was a big deal, and I think it was something that everybody took ownership for.
And then also around that time, this is still when Paul Johnson's the head coach at Tech. And so I think we came to learn that, okay, well, just different practice periods and things like that throughout the season, there'd maybe a little bit of focus on triple option and stuff like that because you just didn't see it any other time. I would say there's potentially, obviously the Buster Faulkner offense is not like Paul Johnson's, but it is one of those things that probably has some unique attributes to it. I know this wasn't your side of the ball, but how much do you remember about the way in which that Georgia defense at various times during off weeks or something like that would be exposed a little bit to like a triple option or that sort of different style of offense just so you'd be ready for it at the end of the year? And obviously Georgia eventually got very good at stopping that. How much do you remember that part of the preparation during the season?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Brandon. I mean, I think it was once every other week or maybe even once a week, there was this quick, 5 to 10 minute period of going over that triple option defense, just so they've seen it. They've seen it with their eyes. They've gotten plenty of reps throughout the season of it. And then we had a great differentiator playing for us on defense in Roquan Smith. So they put him in the tower and they said, hey, man, you see ball, you go get ball. And it was awesome. And he made all the difference in the world for us. And he was absolutely unstoppable in that football game. You
obviously weren't at Georgia when he was here, but have you gotten much of a chance? Do you know Buster Faulkner? Have you interacted with him very much? He's obviously the Tech offensive coordinator now, but a former Georgia staffer. Did you have much time spent around him kind of after you left UGA? Yeah,
a little bit here and out throughout the building. Wish I could have known to get to know him even more. Sometimes you never know just how little time you have with people, right? In and out of the building. Thought I'd have a little more time with him, man, but he's a great football coach and got other opportunities. So excited for him and then what he's doing at Tech, man. They're rolling and they got a lot of momentum right now.
I'm going to ask you about the Georgia offense here in a moment. Let me remind folks prior to that, it's our Kroer Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And of course, Thursday is Thanksgiving. And if you're not like Jake and a part of an NFL game, well, I'm guessing you're getting ready to get ready with family and friends to enjoy watching some football on TV. And the best of all that has to offer, and of course, the delicious food that you're eating and the wonderful experience with family made so much better when our friends from Kroer help you out with all of that. So I want you to check Kroer out online, Kroger.com, or stop and shop in store for great savings on the great food that makes Thanksgiving a wonderful experience. And don't forget, Kroer also taking care of those in need here this holiday season, too, those who don't have enough food on their plates and or perhaps lonely and in need this time of year. Kroger doing a lot of great things for them as well. So when you go to Kroger.com, you can find out more about that. Kroger, a big part of our holidays here, and they can be a big part of your Thanksgiving as well. In-store or online, Kroger.com, or become a Kroger Boost member here today. So, Jake, obviously we don't take a ton from the UMass game because it is, after all, UMass, but there is still, for me, some value in a week after what was the most consistent for 4 quarters offensive performance of the season for Georgia against Tennessee. Following that up with a pretty explosive day against UMass, good from the start. Carson seemed to be in rhythm. Offensive line's playing, I think, better than it has all year long. Nate Frazier seems to be kind of coming into his own. That there is probably right now as much optimism around the Georgia offense as there has been at any point in this season. What have you seen from that group as of late?
Yeah, that's a completely fair assessment. Being able to see the consistency from the offensive side of the ball, running the football, being able to dominate the line of scrimmage and run the ball in a lot more efficient and effective fashion. And then Carson playing more consistent, not turning the ball over, getting the ball out. And the use of tight ends is starting to show up a little bit more. Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky. And we're starting to see these guys kind of become go-to guys for Carson. So whether that's scheme related or just, hey man, this is just showing up and guys are starting to produce. This is good to see and excited to see them moving forward, especially this late push here in the season.
So real quick follow-up. Why do you think it is that just last 2 weeks, suddenly Oscar Delp's, at least and from a stat sheet standpoint, more productive than he's been all year long, and looks like Jurassic's having some of his better games. Lucky's been kind of a factor all year, but suddenly this Georgia tight end room is sort of functioning the way that a lot of folks probably thought it would for the entire year. What do you think that's about, that kind of suddenly we're seeing what to the naked eye sort of appears like improved play from that group?
Yeah, I mean, I just think guys needed to step up. This is a receiver room that's battled a lot of guys going down, not necessarily healthy, and someone needed to step up and be a playmaker for us on offense. And then finally, the tight end room kind of looked at each other, had a kumbaya, and said, hey, why not us? So, man, this is really cool, really neat to see. This is kind of part of the Georgia DNA that we're used to seeing, and hopefully this is a positive trend moving forward.
Jay, great stuff. Happy Thanksgiving to you. Best of luck to the Lions on Thursday, too, and hope you do truly get a chance to enjoy some holiday time with your family and friends. And, of course, we'll look forward to having you back here on DawgNation Daily and our Kroger Fresh Take here coming up very soon, too.
Thank you, Brandon. Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Really good stuff there from Jake Fromm, the former Georgia quarterback. Always appreciate his perspective on all of this. We told you earlier about big things happening in Atlanta coming up 2 weeks from now. Georgia's back in the SEC Championship, and many of you scrambling now to make some travel plans for that. So if you want to come in for the game, you're looking for a place to stay, can I recommend my friends here in the Dunwoody area? You know, it's right next to where our DawgNation World Headquarters studios are. If you want a wonderful experience with great savings, because there's all kinds of hotel rooms. I'm talking about like 2,100 hotel rooms right here in the Dunwoody area. We're really conveniently located kind of in between two MARTA stations. That means you can come here and stay in Dunwoody. That's sort of outside the hustle and bustle of, like, say, Buckhead or downtown or something like that. It's sort of a safe, family-friendly environment right here in this community. But you can get into the action. You want to go to the game and then get back out and come back and enjoy all of that. This is a great way to do that, like right here in the Dunwoody area. So if you're thinking about that for the SEC championship or perhaps a return for the national championship, I think this Dunwoody area is a great place for you to think about on all of that. 200 restaurants, 300-plus places to shop. Make it a great weekend. Get to Atlanta for the game. Get to downtown, then get back out here to Dunwoody. Enjoy just some of the best restaurant, the best shopping experiences you're ever going to have. We're around here all the time. We love it. So I want you to check it out today. For more information, go to the website. It's discoverdunwoody.com. That's discoverdunwoody.com for more on that. And by the way, one more shout out here too. When you're thinking about folks being happy about the good things happening for Georgia as late, I can promise you nobody's happier about that than our friends from Georgia Farm Bureau, because they're Georgians, just like you, just like me. They're living, they're working, they're cheering on these dogs right here in the state, just like we all are. And that means when it comes time to make a choice that everybody has to make, who you're going to trust for your insurance needs, well, why not trust friendly folks that are in life in the same place you are in communities just like yours all across the state of Georgia? Give them a call, 877-404-1050. That's 877-404-1050. Or you can find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Find out why Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. All right, so for a golden shoe today, we're going to have one of our favorite guys, a guy who gives us so many funny things all the time, our buddy George on tap here, showing the photo. I guess this comes from one of the animated Christmas-type specials you see this time of year. This squirrel with a lot of little squirrels around there. And it says that Eddie's perhaps waiting for the paternity test here right now. Yeah, I don't know if Eddie is having kids or not. But I will say this. Obviously, Eddie, the official mascot of DawgNation Daily. I think tomorrow we are going to find out when Eddie is returning. Now, why he's not been here, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we know originally He was fearful of his life because of some heinous threats by Florida fans. He was fearful for his life. But tomorrow we are going to find out when Eddie is returning. So free Eddie, we could have a pathway towards that. Georgia on Tap will give you a golden shoe here today. Lousy, stinking Gators, they may come after our mascot, but Georgia comes after them, and it always seems to work out in the Dogs' favor. It's now been 1,480 days since Florida has beaten Georgia. They may beat Ole Miss, they may beat LSU, but they ain't beating these Dogs anytime soon. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. Don't forget, we're live like normal tomorrow. We're off for Thanksgiving and then back at it again, probably from home, but still the same show on Friday. So busy week for us, getting ready for game day on Friday night. So we'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. I'm enjoying seeing a lot of Facebook friends over here on YouTube today. And so let me just say this. You got sort of what appears to be two issues going on right now. The Facebook and the podcast. The podcast, I feel like we should be able to fix. We're trying to get it fixed so that it shows up the way. I told you yesterday, I'm just sick about the fact that it's been a hard year for the podcast. The audio version of the show has been a hard year for that. We should be able to get that fixed. The Facebook, I don't know how much control we have over that. I'll have to talk to more people about that. We are very dedicated to being on Facebook because that is where a lot of you spend a lot of your time, and we want to be where you are. I do think, and you have your freedom to watch how you want to, I do believe that both X and YouTube are just better video platforms, especially maybe YouTube because that's it's sort of a primarily a video platform. But we are committed to being as functional on Facebook as we're capable of being, but they're just not that invested in video over there right now. Colby Covers checks in to say, working before Thanksgiving, family matters. Yeah, listen, this is a great time for me because I obviously love the work that I do, and in a few minutes I'm going to get off the air a little earlier than normal, go home, take care of some family business, and then be right back at it tonight to do the college football playoff rankings. So I'm very thankful for a schedule that allows me to do both. The show that I love doing, the content that I enjoy creating, but also plenty of time with my family too, for sure. Let's see what else. Jacob Cummings on Gunnar Stockton. Obviously, a lot of folks were pretty happy with what they saw from Gunnar at the end of the game last week against UMass, so that's always a nice thing to see. Brad Owen says, who would you want in the SEC championship? I think that what we saw from Georgia against Texas would lead you to believe that Georgia might be able to do that again. I do. I don't love rematches, though. And I'm not saying that I would be afraid or anything like that. People sort of turn this into something that it's not. But if I had my preference, I'd probably prefer to play Texas A&M. I also just want to see Texas lose. And frankly, I want to see Texas lose and not make the playoff. And I don't care if it costs the SEC a playoff spot. If Texas loses the only two games that matter for it on its entire schedule, I don't know how you could put them in the playoff. And if I had the power to put a 3-loss SEC team such as Alabama or a 2-loss team such as Texas, I'm going Alabama or Ole Miss or South Carolina any day of the week. I just don't think if Texas were to lose again, I just don't think the argument for Texas is all that convincing. I just don't. Now, they win at Texas A&M and lose to Georgia again, I'm guessing they probably were to make it. But not only would I prefer to play Texas A&M slightly in the SEC championship because it might be of a slight advantage to Georgia. If you look at the long-standing history of rematches in college football, the team that wins game one barely wins 50% of the time in the rematch. Now, conventional wisdom would suggest that it should not be that way. That if you're good enough to win the first time, you ought to be the better of the two teams. But the rematch doesn't always show that to be the case. So just something to keep in mind, something to be aware of. If Ohio State and Oregon play in the Big Ten title game, I'm probably lining up on Ohio State in that rematch for some of the same reasons. I do believe, though, that Georgia was convincing enough against Texas that I believe it probably should be Texas again. But I think in a roundabout way, probably be a little bit easier to beat Texas A&M. Not easy necessarily, but maybe a little easier. I also think this, and I one of the things I got right this year was my prediction that Arch Manning would play for Texas against Georgia, and he did. I think if Georgia plays Texas in the SEC championship, Arch Manning may start. Like, I think we could see a situation where Arch Manning just becomes the guy for Texas. I really do. I really do. And obviously, I mean, if you're a Georgia fan, would you rather face Texas with Ewers or Texas with Manning? I mean, I'm not saying, once again, people want to turn this something it's not. I'm not saying that Georgia would lose to Texas led by Arch Manning, but because of his athleticism, he's more athletic than Quinn Ewers. I do think that's that little bit of an extra dimension that you'd have to think about. So, you know, as I said, I think he may just start, or maybe they try to, you know, pull the switcheroo during the game. But I'm guessing that Georgia gets even more of a dose. If it is Texas, they'll get even more of a dose of Arch Manning the second time around than they got the first time around. Brick says the best Texas team is SMU, which is pretty funny. Spencer Clark says that Ewers is way better than Manning. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Ewers is continually sort of banged up. And look, I think the best game Quinn Ewers has ever played was the game against Alabama last September. I would say in other big games, Ewers has kind of just sort of been okay. Good, you know. And I don't know that Arch Manning is obviously better, but he might be. He might be. BF says he thinks that Texas fans would throw more than water bottles if we beat them again. Could be the case. BLST says Arch Manning was a non-factor in the run game against Georgia. He had one lucky long run. I don't necessarily dispute that. I mean, he did come in and light the world on fire, did have a nice run. I don't dispute that. Like I said, don't make this more than it is, but just file the prediction away. Also saying, what has Arch Manning done to prove he's so great? Once again, don't have an argument that I'm not having. I'm not saying that Arch Manning is great, not saying that Georgia should be afraid of him. Just don't be surprised if he plays more the second time around. And if he's terrible, then that works out to your advantage. Let's see what else. Brodo Baggins, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Colby Cover says, when does turf toe last so long? It's a good question. I don't know that I have the medical expertise to be able to answer that. But that's a great question. Let's see what else. We're probably not going to go super long today. Kent Holcomb, one of our folks from over at both DawgNation.com and Facebook here at YouTube today, says, good to see both Ladd and Brock showing out in the NFL. Ladd's on track to be Rookie of the Year. Bowers should be as well, but his team is so bad he's not getting much exposure. Yeah, they're both having amazing years, and boy, Ladd's getting a lot more attention lately. And obviously had the game last night, the Harbaugh Bowl on Monday Night Football. Let me go to DawgNation.com for a minute and see how they're doing over there. We got some real stories over here at DawgNation.com. I don't think I can read many of these. I'm not quite so sure I can do that. Let's see what else. Yeah, I'm not quite so sure that these are on topic right now. So Randy Hall asked about the high school game this week. Unfortunately for me, I will not be there, but we do have North Gwinnett and Buford on TV. I'll obviously be in Athens for, I tried like crazy. It's like, is there a way we can get this game played at a different time, or can we do something different? Can we get this sort of evolved here? Can we? But the truth is like that messes up the schedules for everybody else so much that nobody would ever want to do that. But we do have a great game on TV. I just want to be a part of it. North Gwinnett and Buford's going to be an awesome one. Oh, yeah, Ali B brings up a really good point. We should have mentioned this before. So I would say lately it's just been hard to get everything in. There's so much going on. But as Lee points out, and Lee's always very good about pointing out the other sports teams, Georgia basketball is pretty good right now. And they beat they were competitive for a while with Marquette, which would have been a really impressive performance on Saturday. And then they turned around the next day and they beat a ranked St. John's team coached by Rick Pitino on Sunday. This is a Georgia team right now that I know that the Georgia basketball is a little bit like the metric system. It's sort of always promised to sort of be the next big thing, and it never quite gets here. But I would say right now, Georgia's kind of playing. You get a neutral site win against the St. John's, things like that. If you handle business in the SEC, there is a very, very realistic chance this could be a tournament team. And I think that to begin the year, you had a lot of people kind of wondering, okay, well, this will be a better team, but relative to the rest of the SEC, is it improved enough to actually be in the tournament? But, even like little things like the North Florida game the other night. North Florida had beaten both Tech and South Carolina, I think. I think that's right. They'd beaten both Tech and South Carolina, and Georgia beat them easily. And that's one of those things where it's like, okay, that doesn't mean all that much necessarily, but it means something that this is perhaps a much improved Georgia basketball team for sure. Senior Dog 54 on Prince Avenue. Yeah, Prince Avenue is playing Calvary Day on Friday. So one of the things that Georgia has done, and I'm not really in favor of it because it's so complicated. So you've got 6As in Georgia. You've got 6A all the way down to single A Division I, single A Division II. But you've also broken off these teams into the private classification, where if you're a private school, 3A and below, even though you play, now follow me on this, even though you played a regular season schedule in the region that you were in, which mostly included public schools, for the playoffs, you broke out of that, and whatever region seed you had, 1 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, whatever else, you took that with you into what is a private school bracket. And they did use a form of power ratings to, finish off the seeding for that tournament. So there is a private school playoff bracket. The number one team in that, Savannah Christian. I'm not saying they're going to win. I'm just saying they're the favorite team right now. And Prince Avenue is still playing. That's where Hebron Christian is, Prince Avenue. They're playing Calvary Day this week. That's a pretty big game. So Prince Avenue is still playing. They're a little bit different team this year. Obviously, no Aaron Philo, no Brock Vandegrift. They're a little bit more about running the football, but they got a sophomore running back. I believe it's Garrison Hurst's nephew. That's a guy that's going to definitely be on the radar for Georgia in the next couple of years. Rambo checks in at DawgNation.com to say, Tech will always be a must-win for me. Dad took me to my first one in 1977. Miserable, rainy day at Grant Field. We lost down to our fourth and fifth quarterback. Yeah, some of my earliest memories, Rambo, now not quite then. For me, the very first Georgia Tech game I probably remember was the 85 game. I didn't go to the game, but I remember Georgia lost that day. Was that the day that who had the big punt return for Tech in that game? But Georgia lost that day, and that was heartbreaking. I remember being so heartbroken by the fact that Tech had lost to Georgia. I just remember I cried that day. I remember that so well. And, I cried a lot when Georgia lost games because unfortunately they lost, a handful of those games back then. So my earliest memory of Georgia and Georgia Tech is a loss too, for sure. Randy Hall says we're the best on Dog Nation. We deserve a special Christmas show. You never know what we might do. We might do a Christmas special one of these days. Yeah, Rambo says it was Gary Lee that went off in 85, and then John Dewberry was the quarterback. That's exactly right. And I remember being at the first Georgia Tech game I ever attended was in 1986. And I remember stadium was pretty fired up that day because Tech had beaten Georgia 2 years in a row. And so Georgia got that revenge that day, and I do remember that. Brodo Baggins says, my dad took me to the Tech game at home the day after getting my tonsils out. One of my favorite games ever. That's awesome, Brodo. Sitting there watching the game, eating some ice cream. So there you go. Oh, by the way, Chef Jay Bowen, who we saw at Saturday at the postgame show here today, says, I hope UGA beats the brakes off Tech to make a statement. We run this state. I like that. Michael Turner remembering back to the 1999 game, the Jasper Sanks. I believe you're thinking about the Jasper Sanks fumble in 1999. Yeah, I was there at that game that day. That was the year I bought Tech season tickets to get the Georgia Tech game that year. And I obviously never used any other tickets or anything, but just I wanted the Georgia Tech game, so I did that. Had those tickets in hand for that day, and Georgia lost for sure. Alex Waller, speaking of Prince Avenue, looks like Brock Vandagriff is kind of out as the Kentucky quarterback right now. I think for Brock, a lot changed for him when Liam Cohen, who had success as Kentucky's offensive coordinator, we thought was coming back, when he decided to go back to the NFL. I think that changed a lot of things for Brock Vandagriff and his outlook there. I really do. Let's see what else. A couple more comments and we're ready to go. Baggins and friends on the subject of Quincy Carter in South Carolina. I was at that game too. That's the first road game I ever went to. I think that's right. The first road game I ever went to. They tore the goalpost down. South Carolina, weird in the fact that they tore the goalpost down 2 weeks in a row. The week before, I want to say they'd beaten, like, say, San Jose State or something like that after having been winless the previous year. I may have my facts slightly wrong on this, but I think I'm right. So the previous year, they had not won a game at all. So they won the season opener against San Jose State. Their fans tore down the goalpost, which is funny. Then the next week, they beat Georgia, and they tore down the goalpost again. So this idea of, like, rampant field storming is not necessarily a new thing. Let's see what else. By the way, Foster Ma says don't put a basketball on the set. Yeah, we won't jinx the basketball team, but we will talk about them. Ken Holcomb says he used to sell popcorn and peanuts at Grant Field. He says we lived on Charlotte Place within walking distance to Tech and the varsity, but ended up being a dog fan. Yeah. So that's kind of a cool story. Robert Saunders says that was not a fumble. Jasper Sanks was down. Yeah, it's one of the worst calls of all time. Plus, after that, the supposed fumble, if you go back and remember this, I think Chris Young was the Tech safety's name. He picks up the ball and walks it into the end zone. That even if you say it's a fumble, well, clearly Sanks wasn't down, because if he was down, it would be not a fumble. So Sanks wasn't down. Young is not on the ground. He just bends down, picks up the ball, knee obviously never touches anything, and then just walks in the end zone. So even if Al Ford was the referee's name, even if it was a fumble, it should have been a safety. But, like, for a couple of minutes, they just settled at anarchy rule. One of the worst officiating moments of all time. All right, we're getting ready to go. Motivated Dedicated said, shout out to Marietta legend Eric Zier. Yeah, Zier had some big games against Tech. I also remember, and some of y'all may correct me on this. In fact, I'm sure I'm wrong. It's just my memory. The last time I remember Georgia and Georgia Tech playing on a Friday was what was supposed to be Zier's last year in '94. And like I said, sometimes some of these facts may be escaping me a little bit. The 95 game, the one that Hines Ward played quarterback for, was Thanksgiving Day, I believe. But 94, I think, was on a Friday. It was Friday during the day. And Zier got injured in his last game. Do I have some of this right? Most of this right, maybe? Zier got injured in his last game, and Bobo came in. Bobo had a pretty big day for Georgia that day. And I believe they got in a fight. I think they got in a fight 2 years in a row, in 93 and in 94. Some of y'all who have better memories than me, check me on that. Foster Moss says, tell us your Thanksgiving plate. So listen, I'm very traditional. I'm also very much into I'm a little bit like Al Michaels. I don't eat a bunch of vegetables. So it's like, it's going to be the turkey. I like to do a lot of turkey, a little bit of ham, macaroni, my mom, macaroni and cheese, mashed potatoes, corn, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just like Like, my plate is just like beige. Dressing, macaroni and cheese, corn, cream potatoes. Like, it's just sort of a beigey looking plate. There's nothing green anywhere near there. Brad Owens on the subject. Now they have these like collapsible goalposts. I have seen some of those. Jay Shipes on the subject of Miami not being able to take a knee, going back to obviously last year. That's very funny. Let us see what else. We're going to get ready to go. Chef Jay says growing up in the 80s and 90s really makes you appreciate how Georgia has beaten Tech over the last 2 decades. Back then, I would have compared it to like the Florida game in my household. Yeah, it was really weird. And I don't know how many other teams were like this. This probably was not a good idea. I mean, a lot of things over the years, I'm just not quite so sure if we had a chance to go back and do it over again, you'd do it the same way. But Georgia played its 3 biggest rivalry games in consecutive weeks all at the end of the season. Like how is that a good idea? But, I mean, that when I was a kid until, the 90s it started changing. But when I first started paying attention to Georgia football, mid-'80s into, like, say, the mid-'90s, almost mid-'90s, Georgia played last 3 games of the season, Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech. And so it's like, now the Clemson game was also really big in the earlier portion of the year, but it's almost one of those things of, like, I always remember a couple of things. I remember you kind of get sad a little bit when it's like you kind of made it to the Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech portion of the year because you realize the season's about to be over with. It's going to be a cold winter. So I remember that. But also it's like, man, that's a grind. Like the games that emotionally meant the most to you. Because back then, Georgia, in my era, Georgia was not competing really for the SEC championship. They had faint hopes. For the most part, not really doing that. Beating the rivals was about, the best Georgia could hope for. And when I first started coming up, Auburn sort of had Georgia's number a little bit. Cassie Turner says Brent Key wants this game more than anything else. They're not to be overlooked. I'd say that's the case. And as Connor pointed out, Key, to his credit, has made this more of a rivalry. So to his credit, that's true. Let's see what else. Yeah, Robert Saunders also shouting out Heinz Ward playing quarterback in 95. That's for sure. Brodo Baggins says green bean casserole is slept on. I'm sure that's probably the case. I'm just kind of a picky. Honestly, I'm pretty weird about a lot of things. I'm a pretty picky eater, to be honest with you. I'm a pretty picky eater. Senior Dog 54 says we have a dressing recipe in my house that's my 5th generation granddaughter's making this year off the charts, originated with my grandmother. That's really cool. So my mom makes dressing that my grandmother's, actually my dad's mom, that she made, and it's one of those kind of special things, too. You kind of pass that kind of stuff down. It's always really good. I also think that dressing is sort of an interesting food in that we kind of only eat it. I mean, I guess they have it at, like, Golden Corral, but, like, you kind of only eat dressing a couple times a year. And on the one hand, I'm like, we should eat this more often. But on the other hand, by saving it, it kind of makes it more special, doesn't it? I think that's an interesting thing. Interesting thing. All right, we are going to go. Lee also, by the way, speaking of other sports, says excited about the gym dogs, softball. Also, I live a little closer to Athens now, so I'm sort of hoping we get over to see some more of these winter and spring sports. Problem is my kids are doing so much stuff, it seems like we don't have time. But now that I'm living a little closer, I'm hoping that we do a little more of that. Hoping we do a little bit more of that. All right, we're going to go. Good stuff. UJ Marine says, I don't eat any casseroles because people hide peas, mushrooms, and stuff like that in casserole. It is true. It is true. You got to be, for a picky eater like me, you got to be careful with like food sort of hidden in other food. You never know quite what you're going to get on that. That is indeed the case. All right. Thanks to all of you. I really appreciate it. Always a lot of fun. Come in here and talk. Excited about this week. Excited about everything going on with Georgia. What a cool time. And obviously a lot of this predicated on a big rivalry win for Georgia. So we're going to be back with you tonight for the rankings. That'll be fun. Normal show for us tomorrow, and then we'll take off for Thanksgiving Day. So hope you're having a great week. If you're getting a chance to be home from work, maybe many of you watching live in a way that you don't normally get to do. So I just really appreciate all of that. And, of course, thanks to our friends at RS Andrews who make it possible for you, too. And, by the way, it's about to be really, really cold. That means RS Andrews is a great resource for you to get your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh spec. So, please, find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll keep you warm and toasty all winter long with that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Somebody may have told you need a new heating unit. Eventually you might. But our friends at RS Andrews may be able to tell you how you can get some new life out of that old unit. So please find them online today, rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll talk to you then.